What up, skirmishers? It's your pal Graham. This is another episode of my Wargame design series where I'm making my own sort of rule set to use for Age of Sigmar models. It's called Realmwars. That's the working title. And no, it's not very good, but that's what we're working with. This episode is exciting because oh my god. This video is going to be exciting because we are actually like talking about mechanics and how things work. Up to this point, we've kind of just been talking about like top-down things. Really, a lot of our like high-end concepts and our goals for the whole shebang. So I wrote up an elevator pitch for my game. Realmwars is a miniatures agnostic war game in a high magic fantasy setting where armies clash to determine the fate of the realms. Straightforward unit rules ensure minimal downtime while evoking palpable theme and play styles. Scenarios reward meaningful choices and clever plays, and unit customization allows for multiple strategies and player expression within a given army. So let me see if I can keep fast forwarding through these different videos here. So starting last time, we started talking about the major elements that we are designing, and these are those major elements as outlined by Sam Pearson, whose video series I'm following along with. He's been putting out like roughly one video a month about it. And then I think he missed maybe this last month. So it's given me a lot of time to sort through my own stuff. So you can see on the left there, core design elements is what I'm referring to. Last time we talked about turn structure. And then this next video, we are talking about combat. But in this turn structure, we're doing alternating activations, although I'm considering putting in a lot of double activations, meaning that I get to use 2 of my units before your turn. And that way, instead of having to go back and forth, if we each have 12 units on the table, that's 24 turns in a round. And I'm hoping to shrink that number by allowing some double activations. Also, sort of a big theme for my game is I'm basing it off of Star Wars Legion. I almost said loosely basing off of it. There's a lot of things that I'm borrowing from Legion, and that's great. It's recommended, if you've never designed a war game before, that you design stuff for an existing game. I've made some scenarios for Star Wars Legion. Haven't really done a lot of unit creation for that. So this is still a pretty big leap, but that said, I am trying to borrow as much as possible from an existing functioning game to set myself up for the most amount of success. Because there is a chance that like I put things together and I make a prototype and it just doesn't work. The damage doesn't scale right for the number of models, or the way that I thought the commands were going to work ends up totally falling flat on its face. And so, I think trying to borrow as much as possible is very good. So I did borrow a fair amount from Legion's turn system, which we talked about last time. And so now I'm going to start digging into Le Combat. So there's a couple aspects of combat to design here. And as a war game, combat is going to end up being one of the most probably intricate systems that exist within the rule set, where some units are going to be good at objectives and some units are going to be good at moving, but everyone has to have a role in combat, right? Like that is really the heart of this game, because that is the interaction that you have with your opponent, is primarily through violence. If you think about board games, let's say that there's a pool of resources in the middle. Well, the primary thing that you're interacting, and the reason why this is a board game that you play with your friends and not like a solo puzzle that you're solving by yourself, is that your opponents can take those resources from the middle maybe before you do. And so you need to prioritize which different resources you want, maybe factoring into what your opponents are doing and what they're most likely to take. in a worker placement board game. You've got a board with all these different actions on it, and most of those games revolve, like the Uwe Rosenberg classic board game, where you are doing worker placement. When an opponent picks an action that's on the board, you can no longer pick it. And so again, you sort of have this interaction point with your opponents around the table. And I think that's a really important thing with any kind of tabletop game. So when it comes to war games, that point of interaction is going to be your combat. So important aspects of combat to design. Sam's going to talk about it in a minute here, but we are talking about the attack sequence. And that means like the order of resolving an attack, right? If I go up and attack you, what does that actually look like? And there's different steps involved. Early on in the process, I said, I want to make a game that uses Polyhedral dice, that uses Dungeons and Dragons dice with these really cool and famous fantasy miniatures. And so I guess now's the time. Now's the time to figure that out, right? Yeah, if I want all these different weird dice sizes, but I want to use it in a war game, then I feel like that's kind of cool and interesting. And so we're going to talk about that today. And importantly, when you're designing a system for a game, particularly an expandable game, such as a war game or a card game or something where you're always adding new stuff to it, what is the design space that's available? You almost need to future-proof it, where you need room to, like, you need knobs to turn, right? If I want to make a fast unit that doesn't have very much armor, how can I represent that in the game? Versus a very skilled warrior, how do I represent that? Versus like 3 goblins in a trench coat, what does that look like? And if the rule was simply, you're going to roll 4 dice, and if whoever rolls the most 4s or higher wins, and then the loser takes 3 damage. If that was every combat, then there wouldn't be a dial to turn necessarily, unless I said, well, but you can change the dice based on what your skills were, or you can add dice to it, or you have keywords that interact with the dice that you're rolling. So you do need to kind of create the borders of your sandbox that you get to play in. And that's probably a lot of art and science in terms of how that gets designed and how you put that together. And I suspect that that's probably where a lot of game development struggles, in that, like, where do you set the boundaries, right? Like, I thought this was going to be okay, but actually it ended up totally skewing the game, so I need to rein that part in. Or I actually thought that this was going to be interesting enough, but really there's only 2 options, and I want to have more than 2 kinds of weapons, so I need to expand this side out more. So again, using an existing game, I'm hoping helps me lay the foundation, really set up those borders in a way that's probably pretty close to a good starting point. So Sam here is going to talk a little bit about what exactly I mean by the attack sequence, and then we're going to get into it from there.
Strengths and shortcomings. So to begin with, Warcry's attack sequence is a single roll of the dice called the attack roll. Each time you make an attack roll, you usually roll 3 or 4 dice together. It depends on the weapon, but even a standard sword equipped by a grunt will have 3 attacks normally. You roll the dice and use a comparison to determine the amount of damage inflicted on the target. The comparison is the strength of the weapon versus the toughness of the target. If the strength is higher, every roll of a 3 or more scores a hit. If they are equal, it's a 4 or more. And if the toughness is greater, it's a 5 or more. In addition, rolls of a natural 6 score something called a critical hit, regardless of the toughness of the target. Once you work out how many attacks hit, you move straight to the end of the sequence and apply the damage. The damage of the weapon is split into two characteristics. The first is the damage applied for each regular hit, and the second is the damage applied for each critical hit. You can see here it is 1 and 3. So this is Warcry's attack sequence. It's a single step dice roll, and you can see it's quite different to the classic Warhammer attack sequence. One aspect I like about this system is you roll multiple dice, even for something like a standard sword. As a result, every dice rolled feels like the swing of a blade or the loosening of an arrow, and as a result it feels quite visceral. I also like that there's a range of damage each attack gives. This standard attack with a sword can inflict anywhere from 0 to 9 damage in total, and this in turn allows fighters to have a pool of hit points to soak up the attacks. A standard fighter in Warcry will have 10 wounds, and together this allows for an attritional style of play. Over the course of the battle, fighters will eventually have their wounds whittled down the longer they fight. Let's look now at the classic Warhammer attack sequence, which in comparison has quite a lot of steps. In most Warhammer games, every attack, usually represented by a single dice, will have to be rolled multiple times as it moves through a sequence of steps. It starts with the hit roll, then the wound roll, and lastly the save roll. And then depending on which Warhammer game in particular you are looking at, there might be more steps added in. For example, in modern 40k and Age of Sigmar, they'll often have a damage roll in there after the save roll to represent powerful weapons that can bring down monsters or tanks in a single hit. In addition, there is also often a ward roll or a feel no pain roll, which comes right at the end and is a second chance for the defender to stop the attack. The 40k players among you are probably groaning right now because in the current game these two extra steps, random damage plus a feel no pain save, essentially slow the game down to 1 frame per second when they both come into play, and this is due to the way they interact with each other. In old Mordheim, which also uses the classic hit, wound and save sequence, there was an extra step at the start of the sequence for comparing initiative values to see who struck first, then another extra step between the hit and wound rolls with a chance to parry, as well as a critical hit step that came after the wound roll if you rolled a 6 to wound. So this classic attack sequence has quite a few different iterations, but in all cases it's a much more complex system than Warcry with lots and lots of dice rolling.
Yeah, some interesting thoughts there comparing both Warcry and sort of classic 40k Age of Sigmar. Both those games have that sequence that he brought up, the roll to hit, roll to wound, roll to save, and then adding on like extra damage and the ability to shrug off damage. So that's what I mean by attack sequence. Now, rather than wax poetic about the Warhammer stuff that Sam was just talking about, he does that in his video, so I guess you can watch that. I wanted to give the context for what the Star Wars Legion attack sequence looks like. So you can see here there's an attack roll. That's your offensive effect. And then that's going to produce a number of successes. And then that's going to go to a cover roll, where if your defender is in cover, they get a cover roll to possibly shrug off a couple of hits, which is relatively unlikely, but possible. And then there's a save roll that represents your defender's armor. And so you're going to start off with a pool of attack dice that, let's say you're attacking with 10 dice, you roll them all, and you get 7 hits. You go to the cover roll. Cover is going to shrug off, let's say, 2 of those. So now you're down to 5 hits. And then the armor save shrugs off another 2, and your defender ends up taking 3 damage because after the attack roll set up the number of hits, cover and save 808 at those, and then now you've got your damage. An added thing here for Star Wars Legion that's unique versus like classic Warhammer games is the dice they use. So Warhammer uses a classic D6, and because that's the commonly available component, then they said that's what we're doing. And so all of their rules are designed around using 6-sided dice. Legion comes from sort of an American design philosophy, specifically from Fantasy Flight Games, who said if there is a component that we can make to serve the game, then we'd like to make it. And they get teased a lot for it. It feels like almost every Fantasy Flight game from 2010 to 2019 had custom dice, but Legion has custom dice. And specifically, they are color-coded dice based on dice quality, meaning that there's different dice that are more likely to succeed than others. So inaccurate weapons, low-skill soldiers will use low-quality dice. So, for example, stormtroopers use white dice. They only have a 3 out of 8 chance to hit the target. High-power weapons and skilled combatants will use high-quality dice. So, conversely, Yoda rolls 4 red dice on his attack. Now, 10 stormtroopers are going to roll 10 white dice, and so they roll a lot more dice than Yoda's lightsaber. But Yoda's lightsaber has a 7, it rolls 4 red dice, and each red die has a 7 out of 8 chance to wound the target. Plus, there's additional keywords that make that weapon even better. So generally, Yoda is going to be more effective at attacking than a bunch of stormtroopers, which makes sense. Notably, attack profiles can combine low and high quality dice to create different feels. So, a good example is I always like the Z6 minigun, which is equipable by clone troopers and rebel troopers. So, you've got a bunch of rebel troopers. Everyone's wearing cargo pants. They've got these regular blasters. Now, rebels tend to have high quality attacks, but they don't have the quantity of attacks. That's typically how they're designed. Whereas like stormtroopers and other Empire units are going to have better armor to represent the better equipment that they have, so their saves are better. But stormtroopers are not known to be accurate, so they use lower quality dice, right? So it's the kind of faction identity that's created from having different dice qualities. And then my example on combining low and high quality dice, your rebel troopers are going to roll black dice. That's pretty average. They've got about a 50-50 chance to hit the target. But then if you add in the minigun shoots a whole bunch of bullets, but they're not necessarily that likely to hit. So the Z6 minigun adds 6 white dice. So you've got the 4 black dice that are like average, and then you've got 6 low quality dice, but there's a chance that, all those dice, 2 actually hit the target. And so it's considered to be a very swingy attack. Versus something like, if you have a rebel officer and they've got a very, like a blaster or something. Well, that officer isn't going to roll a ton of attacks because he's just one dude, but they still want that to feel like you're making an impact on the battlefield, so they roll 2 red dice. So it's similar in some ways to that Yoda attack pool, where they've got sort of the high quality dice that they're working with. But that's not the full picture of how the Legion attack sequence works. So I want to expand on that. And this is kind of taking it a step beyond what Sam shared for the Warhammer games. But there's a couple other notable things that I'm going to borrow from my design that I want to talk about here. So, in Star Wars Legion, dice also have a critical hit result that bypasses defensive effects. So, a critical hit is rolling an 8 on an 8-sided die. So, it's a 1 out of 8 chance. And no matter what quality of die you're using, there's always a chance that you're going to crit in that game. So, in that Rebel Z6 example, you're rolling 6 white dice, and so most of those are going to miss. But those white dice are as likely to hit as they are to get a critical hit. Now, what does critical mean? Critical means that you are going to bypass defensive effects, defensive abilities. And so you can see that in our attack chart here, where if you start at the attack roll on the left side of your screen, you can use some offensive abilities, and after those abilities, you're going to end up with a number of hits and then a number of crits. Now, you'll see that the hits are then going to go to cover. There's a chance that cover is going to absorb one or more of those hits. And then the defender's going to get some defensive abilities. Maybe they're wearing some kind of armor, or they're like a vehicle that has armor, right? That would count there. Or maybe they hunkered down and they represent that by taking a dodge token. The dodges can cancel abilities, right? Crits get to skip all of that. And so crits ignore cover. So you can't shake off a crit with your cover roll. And then armor and dodges and some other examples of defensive abilities can't absorb crits. So then crits automatically get all the way to the end, which is that armor save roll that I talked about. Meaning that you can create weapon profiles that are more likely to crit or have ways to help you earn more crits. And even if you don't have that many dice, if you're still able to get a lot of crits, you might still be able to get through as many hits as another unit by using your special offensive abilities to get more crits. And then you're going to skip some of the ways to mitigate that damage. So that's how they create different feels, by having not only different dice qualities, but then two different results that you can get on a die, a hit or crit. In D&D, crits mean that you do extra damage. And so I always equated that to doing extra damage. But in this context, it's just an extra accurate attack that, cut through your armor plating or, maybe hit some gasket or something on the leg of your ATRT walker or something like that. Many unit and weapon abilities modify the dice that you roll or the dice that you've already rolled. So by that I mean you can upgrade the quality of your dice. Let's think of an example of that. If you bring a special forces squad that has a special like saboteur, the saboteur is going to have like explosive charges. And to make the explosive charge attack more potent, they say that every model that's still standing in the unit gets to upgrade one of their attack dice. So what that means is you're going to upgrade like a black die to a red die. The black die I said was like roughly 50-50. The red die is going to be 75% or more likely to hit. So you're increasing the accuracy by getting into close range with this explosive charge. Another example of that, the inverse, is that if you walk up with a rocket launcher before you shoot it, they have the cumbersome keyword, which means that you are going to downgrade all of your dice. So effectively, your rocket, while it could do the same amount of damage, is less likely to do so, right? So it becomes a much less accurate weapon if you've stepped forward with it before shooting, as opposed to standing in place and taking your shot, which makes sense for a big old heavy rocket launcher, right? And then I said weapon abilities modify the dice that you've rolled. So that's where your rerolls come into play, or converting a hit into a crit, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what the offensive abilities do. They're going to output into either hits or crits. Hits have a chance to get absorbed by defensive effects. Crits mostly don't. They get around most things by default. And then you get to the armor save roll. And there's different quality of armor save rolls as well. So if you have light armor, you are going to save roughly 1/3 of the time. Whereas if you have medium or heavy armor, you're going to save about half of the time. Or in the case of like some heroes or like Mandalorians with the special Beskar armor, you're going to save 2/3 of the time. And only 1/3 of those incoming hits are going to turn into damage on average. So that's the different steps. So before I get into my system, I just want to comment that this works pretty well. The cover roll is an addition from the second edition of the game from 2024, and it's fine. It is one extra thing, and one of the complaints about Warhammer that I have, at least, is that you roll way too many dice and you have to roll way too many times. Like Sam was saying, you have to roll to hit, and then you're going to roll to wound, and then your opponent's going to roll to save, and then whatever gets through the saves, you're going to roll for damage if it's doing more than one damage per bullet. And then after all that, you figure out how much damage is coming in, and then there's a chance that they're going to shrug it off. So it's like a 5-roll process. And if you ever watch a battle report for Warhammer, it's like agonizing because they're like, all right, well, I'm going to move up here with my orc boys and I'm going to attack. And then they're in the dice box for like a straight 45 seconds, just rolling huge pools of dice over and over and over again. And then at the end of it, it's like, all right, you take 4 wounds. And surely there's got to be a better way for me to say I attack with my orc boys, and after some rolling, we got 4 wounds. Like, we got to simplify this. So the cover roll in Legion, I don't feel like is too egregious, but I did say in my like, not cliff notes, my overall tenets, my high concepts, that I want the game to move along pretty quickly. And so for my game, we're actually going to remove the cover roll and do it a little bit differently. So let's talk about my system. I gave this a little bit of thought. I actually tried it out in a D&D adventure with some friends, and the concept worked really well. I didn't have the math right yet, but after a few more years of thinking about it, playing some Star Wars Legion that also interacts with dice quality, I'm feeling pretty good about my core concept here. And then we're just going to have to use playtesting and some math to figure out what makes the most sense for how to design the units within these parameters. So this is a system that I'm calling, for now, working title, the Poly 5-Ups system. That's because they use polyhedral dice, and you're trying to roll 5s or better on the dice. 5 up. When attacking with a unit, assemble a pool of dice with their weapons' specified dice types. So, for example, let's say I've got 5 spearmen, and each of the spearmen rolls a d10, and then they are led by a banner captain, and that banner captain rolls a d12 and 2d8. I'm going to combine all the dice and keywords into a single pool, and so then my pool in that example I just gave you is going to be a d12, 5d10, and 2d8. And just put it all into one big pool and you roll it. All results of a 5 or more are successes. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all my 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. Just take them right on out. Also, all results of a 10 plus are critical hits and are going to circumvent the defender's abilities, just like in Star Wars Legion. So let's talk about this design space a little bit. This allows for differing weapon profiles, multiple attacks, swingy or inaccurate results, or high weapon skill, just like those Star Wars dice, right? D6s are very inaccurate, but I can put in a bunch of them if I wanted to. You know, I could have a big swarm of rats and they each roll a D8 and a D6. And so if I've got 10 rats, that's 20 dice. But the quality of those dice is relatively low versus my 10 spearmen or, my 5 elite warriors, or I might have, 3 guardians with these big halberds and they're going to roll, a single D20 each, right? So they're not going to get as many hits, but they're very accurate versus the 20 dice from the rats might get more hits maybe, but it's also very swingy. So you can create some different feels there. I mentioned that criticals ignore defensive abilities and go straight to saves, just like in Legion. And then unlike Legion, the different dice have different chances to crit as well as hit. In Legion, we got D8s, and if you roll on every D8, regardless on the type, there's always a chance that you can crit. And so there's an element of that game called fishing for crits, which is where you're like, well, I just got a bunch of these like weenie soldiers and I really got to get rid of this tank. So I'm going to take all my dice and I'm just going to throw them all at the tank and hope that there's a chance that I get a couple of blaster bolts and some key weaknesses in the tank and get a wound or 2 through. That won't necessarily be the case here, depending on what the weapons are. So D6s and D8s cannot crit at all. So in that example of the rats, there's no chance that they're going to crit. So they're going to be basically ineffective against like a really high armor target, which is going to be, you know, there's going to be less armor in this game than in the space game with tanks. That being said, I can see maybe a couple of war machines having really hard armor profiles. I think there are going to be some units that have armor 3, 4, maybe even 5. So you would need to ensure that your army has answers to those things. But I also don't suspect that there's going to be a lot of die pools that only have D6s and D8s. I think by default, D10s are going to be very common. D10s are likely to succeed. There are a 60% chance to get some kind of success, but relatively unlikely to get a crit because there's only one side out of that 10-sided die that can qualify as a crit. So there's a chance, and you can fish for crits with D10s. You're likely to get a bunch of hits if you have a big pool of D10s because of that 60%. D12s are slightly more likely to succeed than D10s, only 6% more likely to get some kind of success, but notably more likely to crit, 25%. And so you can see that uptick in quality, in the math there. D20s are really high quality attacks, 80% success rate, 55% crits. And that represents consistent but possibly low damaging weapons. I would not give a unit of 10 dudes D20 attacks because that kind of breaks the feel that could be created otherwise, right? I would rather have maybe a character who's got this holy sword, and that holy sword is going to roll a D20, a D12, and 2 D10s, right? And so there's a probability curve there where they're very likely to get one hit, almost guaranteed to get one hit. There's a good likelihood they'll get 2 hits, but the drop off is pretty sharp in that the likeliness to get 4 hits is probably only like in the 20 to 30% range. So again, some really interesting things you can do with the different dice qualities here. But 2 out of the 7 polyhedral dice haven't even been discussed yet. So the D percentile die, which is that 10-sided die that comes in your polyhedral dice set, but it just has the multiples of 10s. And that's going to be used for saves. So instead of a 5-up always being successful, our saves are going to be based off of an evasion stat. And more evasive targets are going to be more likely to save on that D10. So for example, like an 8 or higher is going to be like a bulky soldier. A 6 or higher might be like a really fast elf or a rat person, because a 6 or higher is 50% of the time they're going to shake it off. On top of that, cover is going to be built into the save roll. I said I was going to remove that cover roll. It's going to be built into the save roll, which is going to give you +2 to your evasion if you're in cover. Meaning that evasive elf that had a 50% chance of shaking something off with a 6-up actually now only needs a 4-up while they're in cover against incoming like arrows and stuff. So, that the 4-up is pretty consistent, right? That's going to be what is that? 70% chance to save for every hit coming in. So there you go. One of the things that I like about this is it helps avoid confusion between attackers and defenders' dice on the table, right? The attacker makes their big dice pool, throws it on the table. They start counting it up and they're like, all right, 8 hits. And so then the defender says, cool. And they're going to grab their dice and they're going to roll it on the table. And maybe the attacker hasn't picked up all their dice yet. The defender's dice are literally going to look different because they're going to have a bunch of zeros on there. So I thought that was a nice visual cue to say like this die is different. And so it does something different. Similarly, the D4 is going to be used for special effects and rallying. So it's the start of my activation. I'm going to rally. I'm going to grab some D4s, throw them on the table. Whoa, what are you rolling for? Oh, that's just rally. I know because I see that they're D4s. You're not attacking me yet. Cool. Got it. Also, let's say I have an attack that has a 25% chance to poison. Well, I can pull together my dice pool of all my D8s and, D10s or whatever, put them all in my hand, and then I can throw in that single D4 because on the result of a 4, I'm going to deal some poison. So then I roll it all at once. It's one less thing that I have to account for. And, I think that's a cool lever that I can pull in terms of how swingy I want different effects to be. So rather than just say poison weapons always deal poison, now there's a chance they can poison. And I think there's some opportunities there. There's a chance that my net is going to slow you down. There's a chance that my spell attack is going to confuse you, like that kind of stuff. So now that we've talked about the dice that's involved, let's go to our attack sequence. This is what it's going to look like. And I just took that Legion sequence from before, removed that cover roll, and set it up like this. This is actually very similar to how Legion First Edition looked. So we're going to start with that attack roll. We're going to use some offensive abilities. Maybe we're going to have some reroll effects, although I want to I don't know. I'm wary of putting in too many rerolls. That's another complaint with 40K where you're already making 6 rolls and then you put in a reroll step in like half of those, and now you're making 9 rolls, and it's like, oh my god. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's fine. So you're going to get some rerolls. You're going to get some ways to modify your attacks. And then we're going to end with a number of hits and a number of crits. Those crits are going to go straight through. The hits, we're going to stop at defensive abilities. This is going to be your armor, your dodges, your whatever effect. Then we get to the evasion step. If you're in cover and it's a ranged attack, your evasion is going to get improved. And then you're going to roll 1 evasion die for every incoming hit and crit. And then that's going to result in damage. Notably, Legion, you do 1 damage for every hit that gets through their saves. That's going to be the same thing here. So there's not going to be a multi-damage effect like there is in primarily 40K. Is like Sigmar has it too, but 40K specifically has like multi-damage weapons that are, I guess, designed to get through like tanks and stuff. I don't know. I always took my anti-tank weapons and just shot at characters because the effect was the same. And if I got 1 hit through to a character, then I got to do like D6 plus 2 wounds and like take away half their health. So, there's some other designs from Star Wars Legion that I'm going to be using that kind of go along with this whole system that we've talked about here. Remember, if it ain't broke, steal it. So there's a sort of a universal offensive buff in Star Wars Legion that I intend to lean into. That game is called an aim. Here, we're going to be calling it a focus token. You can give out offensive buffs from your support heroes to the rest of your army, or your army, like your units can take an action to focus, and then you spend those focus tokens to reroll 2 attack dice. As a way to interact with that, you can improve the effectiveness of your focus tokens with the steady keyword, which will let you reroll additional dice for every focus token you spend. So focus tokens normally reroll 2 attack dice. If you have steady 1, you can reroll 3 attack dice. If you have steady 2, you reroll 4 attack dice. This is in Warhammer, a typical offensive buff would take the form of like either you get a +1 level of armor piercing, or you're going to roll to hit and you get +1 on all your hit dice. So, or +1 to wound. Mathematically, they all have the same effect on the end die pool, but they have so many different rolls. So then I guess the idea is that thematically, if it's like an accuracy boost, it would buff your attack roll. Whereas if it's a strength boost, it would buff your wound roll. again, mathematically, it ends up being the same thing. But it does apply to all the dice that you roll in your entire attack pool for that game. So those offensive buffs are like not very potent for smaller squads and crazy potent for big squads. And so a lot of what you do in Warhammer is you find a support character that gives a buff like that and then pair it with just the biggest darn squad that you can. So that, you know, if you're rolling 40 dice and you hit on 3s instead of 4s, like that's just going to matter more, right? So with the token system that Star Wars Legion uses and that I am currently planning on using here, then it's granular, right? So 2 dice is 2 dice. Theoretically, each focus is going to be worth about roughly 1 hit, but it depends on the dice that you're re-rolling, right? So then as a defensive buff, there's the dodge token. Units can hunker down and gain a dodge token as an action, or you can get them from other spells, abilities, support characters, and you can spend a dodge token to cancel 1 hit. Notably, this is not a crit, so you can cancel a result of a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 on an attack die, but you can't cancel results that are higher than that. Then there is another token in Star Wars Legion called a Surge. Here, we're going to use that as an inspiration token, and this is going to represent heroism on the tabletop. Your inspiring characters are going to give out inspiring tokens, and your army is going to use that to fuel themselves to just do better. So inspiration tokens can be spent during any attack, defense, or rally roll to increase 1 die by 1. And that feels incredibly granular, but the idea is that it basically gives you like a one-off +1 to defend, or a one-off +1 on those attacks, instead of getting it to your whole unit. So it makes the whole game a little bit less swingy, a little bit less RNG, as you boost your consistency. Also, I think it's cool that you can use this to help you rally, which is what inspiring people would do, right? Like you want to, you're not so scared, and so this is basically a buff to your courage. That's pretty fun to me. The flexibility of it has proven to be really fun and interesting in Star Wars Legion, although the way that the Surge tokens work in Legion and how they interact with the custom dice, there's a lot of units that can only benefit from those Surge tokens on attack or defense, and not both, or sometimes like neither. Like if you're a heavy armor person with who's already very accurate, then like you don't get any benefits from the Surge tokens. So here, inspiration tokens are always useful. I predict it will end up being very interesting, but again, we got to play test this, right? So Star Wars Legion has keywords that just cancel incoming hits. So Armor X cancels X hits coming in. We're using the exact same thing here. Again, crits get through that. Again, that game has a lot of tanks. There's going to be a lot of units in Realmwars, instead of having like really high armor values. There's going to be a lot of units that are like, we're wearing medium armor, so we just have armor 1. And so you'll cancel 1 additional hit coming in. And then if you have like a heavy armor unit, they're going to automatically cancel 2 or 3 hits coming in. And then that's balanced by their evasion. So the heavier armor you wear, the worse your evasion is. And I'm pretty happy with the theory of that relationship. We'll see if that ends up being cool. I don't know. I like it. It makes sense to me. Then I put some other tokens on here. The vulnerable token, there's a token called the Observe token in Star Wars Legion. It's basically saying like you're marking enemies, and then typically another unit from your army is going to attack later in the round and get an offensive buff. They're pretty low power in that game, and so I've made them more similar to the focus token, where you spend it to reroll 2 attack dice against that unit. I like the idea of using the vulnerable status. I feel like there's a lot of ways thematically that it makes sense that, like, you hit this target with acid and now they're more vulnerable. However, we're starting to get a lot of tokens. And this is like, I don't have an ability to distribute a bunch of different specialty tokens to people. This is largely a print and play game. And so, as I keep going with this, we're going to feel like there's more and more tokens on the table to keep track of stuff. So we'll see. Then Legion has an immobilized token and a poison token. So I have those represented here, the slow token and the poison token. The immobilized token in Legion slows you down. Doesn't immobilize you necessarily unless you're slowed all the way to 0 speed. So I'm calling it slow token because that is more accurate. Those would be the first tokens that I would drop if I have to drop something from a component list, right? I'm more hesitant to drop the offensive and defensive buffs, the focus and dodge, because that's so foundational to how Star Wars Legion works. And again, I'm borrowing a bunch of stuff from them. So, I really am concerned about, having, I don't want to stray too far away from the game that already exists that I'm using to build mine. Right. So that's what I'm thinking. So wait, hold on. Oh, what's going on? There we go. Okay. We're going through different slides here. So this is a slide that we've already looked at. And so I'm going to skip it. Great. So let's see what that attack looks like in general. This is going to sound a little bit dry, but follow along and you can visualize what it would be like on the tabletop. We've got our Warriors of Chaos here. We have a squad of 6 of them. They're going to activate charge into melee against a unit of 10 Stormcast Liberators and make an attack. You can see these models here. They each have these big battle axes, these big weapons. And so for this example, I've represented that with a D12 for each. They don't make a ton of attacks, but they are accurate attacks that are likely to punch through defenses. So again, those D12s have a 25% chance to crit. There you go. There's a special unit leader that's been added to this called the Lord of Chaos, and that Lord of Chaos adds 2d10 and 2d8. So I'm got 5 Chaos Warriors and a Lord. I assemble that dice pool. It's 5d12 plus 2d10 and 2d8. I shake it all up and I roll it, and I get these results: 2, 2, 3, 4, 6, 6, 9, 10, 11. So right now I'm looking at 4 misses, 3 hits, and 2 crits. The Chaos Warriors have 2 Inspire tokens from their Zealous 2 keyword that gives them 2 Inspire tokens when they activate. So they're going to spend 1 right now to increase the 9 to a 10. And now that regular hit is a crit. So we're looking at 4 misses, 2 hits, and 3 crits. The Stormcast unit has armor 3. They've got heavy armor on. They got shields. They have armor 3. And that would cancel 3 hits. However, there's only 2 hits. So they cancel those 2. And then 3 crits proceed to the evasion save step. The Stormcast have an 8+ evasion because they are foot soldiers. So they have some evasion, but they are wearing heavy armor, so it's not great. There's only a 3 in 10 chance for them to shake off any individual hit. They roll their dice. They get a 4, a 7, and a 9 for those 3 crits coming in. The 9 is an 8 or above for their evasion stat, so they cancel 1 incoming success, but then 2 get through, and so the Stormcast take 2 damage. They have 2 health per model, and so they're going to lose 1 of their models. I know there's 9 steps on the screen, but hopefully that actually didn't feel like it was too much. It's really only 2 rolls, plus in this case there was 1 offensive ability and 1 defensive ability that the players would sort out. I imagine this attack being able to be resolved I'm hoping in under 45 seconds, maybe in under 30 seconds. So again, we want to get back to the decisions being made on the tabletop with fast, zippy game design, not hovering over the dice box for all eternity. Let's do the reverse. So there are now 9 Stormcast Liberators, and they activate. Their first action is going to be to focus, and their second action is going to be to attack that unit of Chaos Warriors that they are engaged with. So the focus action gives them a focus token. Each Liberator holds a hammer, and those hammers roll D10. So there's 9 of them, so they're going to roll 9 D10, and they get these results. 1, 2, 4, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 10. So there's 1 crit, 4 hits, 4 misses. The player spends the Liberator's focus token. It re-rolls the 1 and the 2 results because they're both misses. One of them turns into a 4. The other one re-rolls into an 8. And so now we're at 3 misses. We went up to 5 hits, and we've got that 110 result for the crit. Chaos Warrior has armor 3, but the Liberator's weapons, the hammers, have bludgeon 1, which is basically like armor piercing, right? So it's going to reduce the Chaos Warrior's armor 3 to armor 2. Therefore, Chaos Warriors cancel 2 of those hits. We're down to 3 hits and a crit. That's 4 successes coming through. So the Chaos Warriors, they similarly have an 8-up evasion. They're going to roll their 4d10. They get 2, 5, 7, and 10, and those Chaos Warriors still have 1 Inspire token left over, so they're going to spend that, convert their 7 into an 8, and get 2 successes on their evasion roll. So they shake off 2 of those incoming hits. 2 hits go through, and they take 2 damage. That one had a similar number of effects going on where here's my die pool. I roll it. I got my focus token, so I'm going to re-roll my 2 worst results. Now I know that I have 6 successes. We have an interaction with our 2 keywords, bludgeoning, which is anti-armor, and then armor. We talked that through. We're going to cancel 2 of the 4 hits that came in, or 2 of the 6 hits that came in, and then roll for the remaining 4. So it's not the fastest system that has ever existed, but I do feel like it is a marked improvement from a lot of Warhammer systems, and I'm hoping in practice it doesn't bog the game down too much. I want to really find that balance between nose in the dice tray and making decisions on the board. So this is like the bulk of my combat system that I've designed so far. We're going to roll with this pretty much exactly as it is until we get to a working playtest. Then we're going to start feeling it out, and we're going to see if this all works. One of the things to consider is just how big are these numbers, right? If I have a bunch of 10-man squads and all the 10-man squads get to roll 20 dice, then maybe armor 2 isn't significant enough of a keyword. Or maybe it's fine, but those 20 dice have to be like D6s and D8s, and I can't put any D10s in there. I don't know. We're going to have to find out. I hope that I can, but I don't want to put D20s in the 10-person squad because that's going to be crazy, you know? So let me know if you have any thoughts to this. I really broke it down into the nitty-gritty. If you've ever played Star Wars Legion before, then this is like just par for the course. This is not particularly strange or different for you. I think because of that, I do have a lot of confidence that it is going to flow reasonably well. And I certainly feel like I have tons of levers to pull in terms of, accuracy and attack quality. And I've got the crits thing and how those defensive abilities are going to interact with those. So it feels like there's a lot of playground here that I'm pretty excited about. And so we're just going to have to see once I pull things together, how this all feels. So thanks for watching this and joining me on my journey. And I'm looking forward to talking to you next time about Realmwars.